breathe out. This is where we live. Can I love even this right now? This argument.
Hi, this is Marjohn Love, and this is Marjohn's Musings. And today's show is a melange. I told you last time that I was going to talk about net neutrality. It's a very important subject. As of today, February 22nd, the laws from 2015 that protected small businesses and individuals so that they could access any website, use any application, and engage in any social media or find entertainment or intellectual stimulation. They could be on Facebook or join computer groups for special interests. All that is now in jeopardy as of today, February 22nd, 2018. A lot of people have asked what net neutrality is. There are some really interesting analogies on YouTube. One pretty young woman is talking about net neutrality as beer, and she's at a bar. Burger King did a very interesting commercial about getting a Whopper, and a Whopper was not in the fast lane. I'm not an authority on information transfer protocols, IPs, or Internet Service Providers, ISPs. What I know is that free and public access to telecommunications, whether it was the telephone or the radio or the television, has been an ongoing concern for over half a century. When I was a little girl, there were 3 TV stations, ABC, NBC, and CBS. And although computers existed, they took up a room the size of half of a basketball court. I can remember in high school, I had to learn how to key punch so that I could punch cards that went into the old computers. And by the time I graduated high school, they were no longer using key punch as a data entry method. They had come up with the keyboard. While I was in college, I had a mentor, Elizabeth Barker, and her husband invented a wired remote control for his television. And I sat there with them, absolutely fascinated. He would push a button and mute the commercials so that the family and their guests could have conversations about the content of the programming. And he said, well, why should I have to listen to all that advertising? I think a lot of people feel that way. In the old days, when there were 3 major networks, there was a very limited choice of programming, and what got shown on the air was the shows that people were willing to sponsor. Kraft, Borden's, General Electric, or whoever else not would buy airtime on the station, and they would approve or not shows, and therefore the entire country saw Gunsmoke, or the entire country saw Jackie Gleason in The Honeymooners. It was a strange time when I was an older child, because once sponsors had purchased television time, they didn't put any money into television programming. And for about 10 years, the youth of my generation suffered through reruns of shows we didn't necessarily even like the first time. Cartoons tended to be slapstick. Elmer Fudd with his gun chasing Bugs Bunny. Sylvester the cat, always trying to eat Tweety the bird. There was a man who changed the course of history of public television. His name was Fred Rogers, better known as Mr. Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. During the Nixon administration, a move was made to cut the budget of public stations like the one I'm sitting in, 1623 Studios, formerly known as Cape Ann Television. Fred Rogers got the opportunity to speak in Congress. If you're interested, I posted the link on my Facebook page. Now, Facebook was a competitor to MySpace. It is now the dominant social media platform. Instagram didn't used to exist. The loss of net neutrality means that startups will have much greater competition from known entities, the big five. I'm sitting in a studio that's partly supported by Comcast. Comcast is one of the key players in wanting to take the neutrality of the internet away so that there would be a fast lane for their preferred customers, the ones who paid them the most, and a slow lane where you might never get the download for people who didn't pay them money. I recently got a letter from Comcast about my little business that folded. I guess they don't watch the show. They didn't know the business folded. They offered me an internet service 20 times faster than my residential internet service for my business. A lot of us in the baby boom generation grew up with television. And sometime in the 90s, when cat food commercials were repeated 15 times in an evening, decided that we would explore the internet instead. We're called the cord cutters. We left television because commercials became intrusive and obnoxious and redundant and ineffective. People didn't actually buy the goods or services. They actually got angry with the constant interruptions of their entertainment media. They moved to the web. I can remember watching things on Hulu, commercial-free entertainment, and being thrilled to be able to just relax after work and watch a show without being bombarded by goods I didn't need and services I didn't want, over and over and over again. Now, people can watch TV on their telephone or on their iPad or on their computer. But there were some skirmishes. If you want to hear the history of Verizon and Comcast and Netflix and that sort of thing, you can go on Wikipedia and look up the history of the internet, and you can see some of the machinations that went on when the powers that be decided they were not going to allow growth of new companies and new technologies. Well, radio gave way to television, which gave way to the internet. But the internet neutrality, I think, is a bit overstated. The Mensa Bulletin has a poet on the cover, the genius of Emily Dickinson's poetry. But the article that I'd like to share with you is from the XCOM, The Goals of Mensa. In 1953, when Viktor Serbakov took over as chairman, the strategy was changed. Viktor dropped the goal of becoming a think tank and instead focused on membership growth and social aspects of Mensa. Well, why did he drop the goal of think tank? Well, because in the early days, when the Department of Defense linked university computers to one another in different countries, Mensa, which is a high IQ club, it's the top 2% of the population, according to intelligence quotient testing. They thought that if they formed this group, the government would come to them for guidance on certain questions, and that never materialized. I don't think they realized that when they agreed to work on computers that were funded by the federal government, everything they worked on was collected by the Department of Defense. There was no need to consult them. The Department of Defense already knew what they were doing, or what they were thinking. I did a show about the Secretary of State making a statement that from henceforth all email would be monitored. I did another show about all telephone conversations being recorded. I almost titled this show, Net Neutrality is the Least of It. My husband's a soldier. When he was in Iraq, I had to sign a document with the Army that they could monitor my computer and that they could monitor my instant messaging and that they could monitor my Skype calls to my husband. I was in 2005. 13 years later, they're still monitoring my computer. I never gave them permission to do that. He's been home for over 10 years now. I personally feel very invaded by my experiences on the internet. As I've told you in the past, I have a cardiac condition and I have to wear special stockings. I went shopping for them because they can cost anywhere from $15 to $110 depending on where you buy them and what quality you buy. I also injured my elbow and I cannot straighten it anymore. And I went looking for information on this type of an injury. It's called a flexion contracture. Once it contracted so that I couldn't straighten it, it became painless. But when it was in a process where I was having trouble straightening it and bending it, it was exceedingly painful. But the descriptions that I found of tennis elbow didn't seem to match. Turns out it's golfer's elbow. I don't play golf, but it's where the tendons were injured. My Facebook, my email, everywhere I went, there were images of elbow surgeries. There were advertisements for compression hose. I couldn't go onto YouTube without being inundated with ads. That didn't used to happen. It used to be that if you left television and went on the internet, you could escape the ads for a little while. And with real net neutrality, no matter which group you were looking for, whether it was Habitat for Humanity or a religious affiliation. We now belong to the United Church of Christ, but when my son was in high school, we were Unitarians. We belonged to the Unitarian Church on Clive Street in Rockport. Well, at that time, when my son was in high school, I owned a Windows-based machine, and the operating system was much simpler, and they assumed someone operating a computer had some computer savvy and understood what was going on. And I went to look up the International Service Branch of the Unitarian Church, and page not found. I thought, that's ridiculous. I went into my computer and found that there was a list that would have taken 3 typewritten pages of all the websites that I was denied access to. Amnesty International was considered to be subversive. They do things like work with the Red Cross to make sure prisoners aren't starved or beaten, sexually abused, left to die of thirst. I found something a while back. It was called the Digital Black Watch. It was a discussion group between the former head of the NSA and some college professors and some security personnel. I showed it to my husband. The next day, we went back to look at it again, to re-watch the video. It was gone. The only digital black watch was advertisements for digital watches which were black. In my life experience, the net has never been completely neutral. I had a painting of Sam's West Coast Adventure, which I painted as the cover for my book, Sam's West Coast Adventure, hanging at the Rockport Artists Association. And a gentleman noticed the motorcycle in the painting, got interested in the book, and Google whacked me. This television show showed up, my Twitter showed up, a dead Shopify showed up, a dead Patreon account showed up, but my Amazon.com, where I could sell my work, did not show up. It took him 6 minutes to find me. Am I like Amnesty International and blocked? Is getting to my website throttled? Can make you sound paranoid. When I used to work in locked inpatient psychiatry with violent and aggressive patients, up in the nurses' station was a little poster. Kilroy was here, peeking over the wall, and in chalk on the brick wall, it said, "Just because you're paranoid does not mean they are not out to get you." I thought that was funny at the time. This show was so important to me that I was crying in my husband's arms last night. I come to you via Comcast. Do I dare tell you that because I'm a senior on fixed income, I have a very modest cable television package? And that even though Comcast broadcasts in high definition, they have a little box connected to my television to dumb down the signal to the old-fashioned size and shape, so that anything with captioning, I lose both edges of the picture. In order to see my own show in high definition, I have to upload it to YouTube and then download it through the internet into my television to be able to see what my own show looks like, because it cuts off the sides and lowers the quality. There's an issue of censorship and of dominance involved in net neutrality. It means that rich people get to decide what everybody sees. For years, rich people decided that black men would be portrayed as villains, criminals, rapists, pimps, and drug dealers. So a great portion of the population thinks that's who black men are. It justifies, in some people's minds, the huge disparity between the number of black prisoners and the number of white prisoners in our prison system. Women who were ditzy and acted like Lucille Ball were portrayed all over the place. Women who were astute, brilliant, talented, they weren't portrayed. And people like Marlo Thomas, who could straddle the role and be sweet and bright, made a great deal of headway. The actress who played Uhura on the original Star Trek series was ashamed that she had to run around in this little mini skirt. And she met Martin Luther King, and he told her, "You don't understand. You are a great role model to black girls all over the country. You are a bridge officer on an interstellar vessel. You're part of the command staff." Depends on how you look at things, your perspectives. But how you look at things is colored by what you see. And if what you see is filtered through someone else's agenda via greed and power-mongering, then you don't get to see the whole picture. What if net neutrality had been defeated prior to the Pink Hat Parade? Young black woman starts a social movement. Tens of thousands of women march and protest all around the country, and they have marches of solidarity in other countries all around the world. Would that have happened if the current FCC administration of 5, who were appointed by the president and not elected, got to block communications between women who were angry about sexist comments and sexist policies? I don't think we should go back to the era of Father Knows Best and Gilligan's Island, where the only entertainment we can see is cotton candy, sickeningly sweet, and definitely biased toward male privilege, and run by male executives. I have a book. It's Philip Hoffman's The Jump Book. He was a famous photographer. On the cover is a picture of himself and Marilyn Monroe, and he was commissioned to take photographs of hundreds and hundreds of people. I spoke to you before about Learned Hand, one of the preeminent jurists, and he has a picture of him jumping, juxtaposed to Grace Kelly jumping. The entire book is portraits of jumping people, including the Duke and the Duchess of Windsor. But when he talks about women, he perceives them as sexual objects. Makes a really interesting observation. What the jump test reveals about the three great love goddesses of today, Marilyn Monroe, Gina Lollobrigida, and Brigitte Bardot, is highly meaningful psychologically and sociologically. It shows that they are basically child women. To the sophisticated reader, and only a sophisticated reader will follow me this far, this will come as no surprise. He knows that an actress becomes a love goddess when they provide the daydreams for millions of American males. Naturally, the average American male wants, even in his dreams, to be at ease. With a child woman, everything is easy, all play and no work. With a passionate woman, however, he is afraid of finding himself inadequate. I went through the book, and although there were women dancers, one woman writer, women comedians, women actresses, the heads of corporations and the heads of media outlets and the heads of state were male. The glass ceiling. It was sort of a who's who of who was important in my childhood. I've been taking a class at the community center in Rockport. It's a course on painting with Carla Mattioli. She's an art therapist. She's also a Tai Chi teacher. And she was teaching a course on the Four Gentlemen. It's an Oriental painting style. And you use a Japanese ink, Yasumoto ink, and these brushes, which are not the same as regular watercolor brushes. They don't have very much spring to them. And I have a beautiful one. It's from a set that I had on a stand, and my kitty decided he wanted to sit in the windowsill, and he knocked it on the floor, broke the stand and several of the brushes. But this one survived along with a couple of the others. And it has a beautiful brush stand, and it has a dipping well for water. It also has a water vessel that's kind of interesting. It has two holes. One you have your thumb on, and the other the water leaks out. I'm still sporting ink stains under my thumbnails. And one of the things she had us do was make a grayscale of ink to water to do paintings. And she does these brain teasers. She has us copy these tricky designs that might look simple, but they're not simple to do, because she's trying to get you to hold the brush in the Oriental fashion, not as a pencil, but up and down, and to learn a different style of interacting with the brush and the paper. And the one we just finished was the orchid. Mine isn't very good. I'm still trying to get the balance between this new technique and a different style. She started our class with a character that means lasting or eternal. They do that because this character has all the basic brushstrokes used in kanji. And kanji is a word that means a pictograph, both in Japan and in China. I purchased a book designing with kanji, Japanese characters, but when I was looking through it, the authors spent a great deal of time in the very beginning of the book about the way of the warrior, Bushido, and samurai, and it went on like that. The shogun and honor, these wonderful kanji. But they were very militaristic, and I'm a pacifist. I try to maintain peace within myself and to project peace into the world. And if I find something that disturbs me, I try to approach it as a peaceful warrior, a person who does not injure others. And that's not always possible. Sometimes you inadvertently injure others. My husband is a reservist, and he gets this magazine, Warrior Citizen, Ready Force X. There's this guy in complete camo. The article I found touching and poignant was A Year in Response to Disaster. 2017 brought wildfires, hurricanes, and severe flooding, and the unprecedented relief efforts of America's Army Reserves. Because men who are fit and strong are often first responders. As I shared with you on a previous show, my sister's partner, during the hurricane, they were in a hotel with no power for days, and because there was no power, the ATMs didn't work, and they couldn't buy food because they'd run out of cash, and he wound up seriously dehydrated and had to be evacuated by helicopter to a mobile military hospital where they saved his life. I think the ability for people to communicate during emergencies is vitally, vitally important. But when the Boston Marathon bombing happened, because the villains used cell phones to set off explosive devices they hid inside pressure cookers and placed among the crowd, the police shut down the cell phone towers. So they're in the middle of this disaster. If you were separated from your family and friends, you couldn't call them. I keep getting all these ads for Xfinity. I get stuff from Verizon too. I think they think I'm made of money, which I'm not. I can remember Ma Bell, Mother Bell, Ma Bell. All telephones belonged to Ma Bell, and you rented them as part of your service package that came through wires that came through your wall. And most people paid $8 a month unless they made long-distance calls, in which case those were expensive. And there was all this brouhaha about freedom, and we need better stuff for phones, and Ma Bell is thwarting everybody, and they're a monopoly, and they shouldn't be allowed to be a monopoly. And if we could do phones, we could do it better, and we could do it cheaper. Well, better, maybe. You know, I have to admit that a cell phone is way better than being tethered to the wall by a curly cord. But cheaper? You gotta be kidding me. Have you looked at your phone bill recently? It's not cheaper. I'd really like a little separation of church and state here. I think we could solve this net neutrality thing by saying, okay, telecommunications is telephone, and computer access is computer access, and cable TV is cable TV. I think the fact that it all got glommed together is part of why this is not a good situation. If internet service providers provided internet service and telephone providers provided telephone service, maybe the telephone would work more quickly. I turn my phone on, I'm trying to make a call. I have to have a software update before I can make my call. They have to download all my email before I can make my call. What if it's an emergency? Oh, then you can dial 911. But what if it's not that kind of an emergency? What if it's, honey, I have a flat tire and I'm going to be late for dinner, and what was our AAA membership number? I don't have my card on me. That kind of an emergency? I don't know. I worry about people that try to dominate the lives and intellectual freedom of others. In the old days, for somebody to tap your phone, they had to be outside your house and clamp into that copper wire and have headphones on. It was pretty easy to spot them. It was also a federal crime for them to do that. When I was a very little girl, party lines still existed. Why did they get rid of those? Well, there was a case in the Supreme Court. 2 funeral parlors. The girlfriend worked for the telephone company, so anytime anybody called up with a bereavement thing, she would shunt their business not to the person they were calling for their funeral service, but to her boyfriend. That was deemed illegal, obstructionist to this other undertaker, and preferential to her boyfriend. It was considered a poor use of the phone system, and calls became private, so eavesdropping operators couldn't spread gossip about what they listened to when other people were talking to one another. But we've grown up with a paparazzi. I can remember seeing photographs of Jacqueline Onassis topless that were taken from 3/4 of a mile away with a telephoto lens up in a tree. I think people deserve privacy and freedom. I mentioned the grayscale. I'm also doing a video course on how to draw by Professor David Brody from those great courses I talked to you about. He's a very methodical man, very clear, very concise, very specific, very precise. And it got me to thinking about how he defined 3-dimensional space on a 2-dimensional plane, so that there's a ceiling above you and a floor below you and the 2 walls, and they recede in space like a prism that's shaped like a trapezoid, so that the front is larger and the back is smaller, and the front is vivid and dark and light, and the back is muted grays, so that you get a sense of atmospheric perspective and also of linear perspective. I can remember in art school, I would sit there and go, oh, yawn. But I was young, and I wanted to paint in color, and I didn't want to spend a lot of time with graph paper and be in black and white. In those days, we used things like a compass to draw a circle, or a technical pencil to draw fine lines, and a special kind of artist's pencil to draw thicker lines And in his show, he talks about how you should make yourself an entire set of all your pencils so that you know which kind of line each pencil makes. And of course, I snapped the tip off of this earlier trying to do something, and now I can't get it to feed properly even though there's leads in there. And it doesn't matter because in today's age of computer graphics, CAD we called it, computer assisted design, you no longer need a compass to make a circle. You can make a circle just by clicking the circle icon and pulling it over to where you want and dragging the circle. I have a template at home with circles and ellipses because as you move a circle back through space, a circle tips and becomes an ellipse. And you don't have to do that anymore. You can take the circle icon from your drafting program and you can drag it, and if you hold down Control or Command, you can make it go in a beautiful circle, perfectly round, or you can torque it into an ellipse. And David Brody wants you to do it by hand so that you learn the skills and internalize them, so that if you were trying to draw a figure, some of the body parts don't fall off the page because you didn't plan ahead enough to place them in the space. He talked about 3 different flaws that I have as an artist. I found it fascinating. And he's so antithetical to Carla with her watercolor, and yet she tells our class, you know, the Chinese masters took 20 or 30 years to master these forms before they did these masterful paintings where they loosen up. And I was thinking, some people call the community center the senior center, and most of her students in this particular class are over 60. In 20 years, probably all be dead. You know, we're not going to make master. But it's interesting to me because kanji is a pictorial language, and David Brody in his course talks about how people learned how to draw before they learned how to write. Before languages were encoded, there are drawings. I brought this beautiful spring purse to show you. It's made out of thousands of tiny little seed beads. When you go to print on your printer, when you do color printing, on a microscopic level, that's what your printer does. It does little dots of color, so fine that you need a loupe to be able to see one dot from the other. But they're there. I found this book at the transfer station. That's the dump for the uninitiated. It says, "The meaning of poetry. Here are 3 common false notions about the meaning of poems. Number 1, poems have no meaning." And then in parentheses it says, "Only a person who through careless reading, lack of exposure to poetry, or deep skepticism has never found personal meaning in a poem would dare to say this." Number 2, poems can mean anything you want them to. Parentheses. This is really the same falsehood as the first, with the added belief that in the absence of obvious external meaning, one's private feelings are of ultimate importance. And then he makes this little aside. You can use your mother's fried chicken for a doorstop, too, if you feel like it. but you won't get much nutrition that way. Number 3, every poem should have one basic meaning which can be stated in a sentence. Parentheses. If the meaning of a poem could be stated in a sentence, all good poets would quit. Each good poem is the shortest way of saying all that it says. So with that in mind, I'd like to share a couple of poems with you. This is a book that had been in the library and was sold off. It's called Inner Chimes, Poems on Poetry, selected by Bobby S. Goldstein. Poets go wishing. Poets go fishing with buckets of words, fishing and wishing, using a line that's loose or tight. Parentheses. Maybe this time a rhyme is right. Parentheses. Unreeling, unreeling, the words till they match the feeling the poet is trying to catch. That's by Lillian Moore. And I'd like to juxtapose that poem intended for children with this one. Unfolding bud. One is amazed by a water lily bud unfolding with each passing day, taking on a richer color and new dimensions. One is not amazed at first glance by a poem which is as tight-closed as a tiny bud. Yet one is surprised to see the poem gradually unfolding, revealing its rich inner self as one reads it again and over again. Naoshi Kiriyoyama. And my favorite poem in the little book is called A Poem on My Pillow. It's by Broad Baggart. I felt very small and the house was dark, but those cookies kept calling from the kitchen. So I tiptoed downstairs and peeked around the corner to make sure there were no monsters. Then I saw my dad alone at the kitchen table with an open book and a pencil and paper. He wrote very carefully. Then he stopped and listened, and he smiled. This morning, I found this poem on my pillow. To the little boy who hides, I listen for your breath while you sleep. I follow your footsteps across the floor above me. I hear the creak of wooden steps as you tiptoe down, and I feel your fear of darkness. Oh, little son, you need not hide from the night. Speak out. Your courage will make light. When I read the poem, I thought, my gosh, he heard me. Was he angry? Did he think I had been bad? Then I noticed how he signed the poem. To my son, with love, from Dad. Well, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to share 2 more things with you. One is that the Rockport Art Association is holding their member show. So if you pay a modest fee and join the Rockport Art Association, they're going to have an exhibit March 31st through April 21st in the Hibbard and Maddox Galleries of the Rockport Artists Association and Museum. The drop-off day is Tuesday, March 27th, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., and the opening reception is Saturday, April 7th, 2 to 4 p.m. And then if your work does not sell, the pickup day is Sunday, April 22nd, 12 to 5 p.m. And before you go ahead and frame something or whatever, you need to read their list of specifications. They're very specific about what you can submit, how many you can submit. It's one entry in each of 3 areas: sculpture, painting, graphics, and photography, okay? But I think public television needs to fulfill its mandate by showing local things in a timely manner while we still can. And for my closing today, I'd like to read you the Daily Word, March-April 2018, the opening poem. It's by Donna Mishbach. Silence wraps me round like the mist out on the bay, taking me to hidden depths where fears are washed away. And as I rest in quietude, all my boundaries cease, leaving me immersed in this unmeasured peace. I'm not sure what will happen with the FCC. Perhaps people who have experienced a free and open internet will come up with a different bandwidth, a different form of communication, so that even if our choices are externally limited, our speeds are throttled or pushed ahead for the rich, that we can still connect with one another, speak our truths to one another, feel solidarity in each other's company. That's all for now.
Breathe in, breathe out. This is where we live. Can I love even this disappointment that I don't know how?